Hello and welcome to the audio recording of the book Tarona's Ghostly Encounters. These are accounts of real situations which occurred while Tarona was working as a paranormal investigator. So hold on to your seats.
Chapter 3. A Spitfire pilot's ghost that haunts a Leicester pub. A mansion haunted by a complete family of ghosts. Odd happenings at a massage parlour. Giant hands around the throat at Market Harborough. It was December 1993 when I was asked by the manager of a Leicester hotel to enlighten them about the hotel's ghost. He informed me that the chambermaids had been frightened by the spirit, who he claims was able to boil kettles without the plugs being in the sockets. Several people refused to stay in the hotel after experiencing various sightings. Andrew Wright, a paranormal investigator, came along to take the sound and temperature readings. Halfway through my interview with the manager, strange things started to happen. The tape recorder switched itself on and off, and the video camera refused to work. The manager told us that on one occasion he had been held by the throat. His wife had often experienced the feeling that something was creeping up behind her. She found ornaments broken after each encounter. The ghostly activity seemed to centre itself in one particular room, number 10. The week before, a Greek guest who could not speak a word of English ran out of this room distressed, telling his friend who was staying on another floor that something had been floating mid-air in his room. As we made our way to the room, we stopped to admire the beautiful stained glass windows at the top of the landing. On arriving, I opened the door to find a freezing cold room. Only moments later, an air freshener plug shot out of the socket and flew across the room all by itself. This invisible force was warning us that it was here. All of us witnessed the incident. Pictures from the Second World War became imprinted on my mind, and I could see men in Air Force uniforms running in panic. Next came the image of Sir Winston Churchill, sitting behind a large wooden table. He was puffing on a large cigar while having a meeting with important military men in this very hotel. Crazy, I thought, but bringing me back to reality with tremendous pain in both of my wrists. They felt as if they had been sliced open, but they had not. All that could be seen were red, blotchy scratch marks. Could this ghost have killed himself, I wondered? Seconds later, these marks disappeared from my wrists. Telepathically, the ghost started relaying messages to me. He was looking for his girlfriend, as he was angry at her for going out with an American serviceman. He mentioned the names Joe and Lily. His agitation could be felt when I asked him if he had taken his own life. He was a pilot whose plane had crashed, and he was ashamed he had not been able to make it back to his airbase. I asked the manager if he had any previous knowledge of any wartime events or if Churchill had ever stayed here, but he replied that he had no idea. A few weeks later, he phoned me at home to tell me he had found out that an aircraft had crashed near the hotel in 1944. It had been a Spitfire. The manager then suggested I should go back to the hotel in the near future to meet a couple of men who worked in aviation. He went on to tell me they had been intrigued by what I had picked up and felt they might be able to clear up a few things for me. A week later, I returned to the hotel and was introduced to the two men who were keen to provide me with information, giving me very useful descriptions of the mechanics of Spitfire fighter planes. Apparently, it was not unusual for a pilot flying that type of aircraft to have his wrists cut while trying to escape from the plane. It was one of the faults with Spitfires, they told me. So the ghost was not being vicious and only marked my wrist to show me how he had died. I believe that this pilot feels deep regret and sadness for not being able to return safely to his base. Also, he's still looking for the woman he was in love with who betrayed him. There are so many questions I would like answering. For example, did the woman come from Leicester? Did she marry the American? Could the ghost be waiting for someone who lives on the other side of the Atlantic? 2 years after visiting the hotel, I started to write a few articles for a newspaper and ask if anyone had any information about the hotel during the war years. To my utter amazement, Richard Smith, the editor of a free newspaper, had spoken to a woman who used to live near the hotel during the war. She told him that it was a house in those days. She remembers that as a child she believed she saw Winston Churchill coming out of the house. When she ran home to tell her mother Churchill was visiting the neighbourhood, she got, in her own words, a damn good hiding. Her mother thought she had been telling lies. Again, it shows the truth is stranger than fiction. And nothing is stranger than a complete family of ghosts who still haunt their mansion. Braunston Hall was built for the Winstanley family in 1776. Set on rising ground in its own parkland, it is a brick mansion with stone dressings. It is 2.5 stories in height and is topped by a cornice and a hipped roof. The house is 5 bays wide, with the middle bay framed by a large blank arch and an elaborate doorway. The Braunston estate was sold by the Winstanley family to the borough of Leicester in 1925. Until recently it was used as a junior school, but at the time of writing it's standing empty, apart from its spirit residence, that is. Accompanied by Leicester Cable TV and various members of staff, I went in search of the supernatural. Up on the second floor corridor, we entered a classroom. The atmosphere seemed to change inside this room, becoming claustrophobic and warm, even though the radiators were stone cold. The air was heavy, and having sensed this feeling before, I knew someone had died of a fever inside this room. Touring the hall was like visiting a ghostly museum, and soon I was picking up and tuning into many deceased members of the Winstanley family. Images from times past were beamed to me, and I felt as if I had been transported back in time. I watched the ghost of a young girl dressed in a long white gown who was sitting writing letters. A dry cough and the chest pain brought to mind the disease of TB. My feelings were this girl was a nun and she knew she was seriously ill. She did not want to die because she had so much left to do, but there was no fear of death with her. Peace filled the room, strange as this may sound. These tranquil feelings changed to one of doom as we made our way up the stairs to the next floor. Feeling the sensation of somebody having difficulty breathing was not in itself pleasant, but the more I walked along the passageway, the more convinced I became that someone had been hanged there, and it had not been by choice. Walking into one of the bedrooms, I could see a young gentleman and a pregnant servant girl. These two were most definitely connected. Sadness was coming from the young girl, who looked to be around 15 years of age. The man was telling her that gentlemen did not marry servant girls. The atmosphere in the room was so depressing I was glad to leave it. The next ghost was of a well-built man who was suffering from gout. Minutes later, the ghost of a pig running across the room came through, all very odd. In the next room was the spirit of a middle-aged woman reading a letter. She was gazing at a photo of a young military man. Maybe this was her son. Down the corridor was the spirit of a boy around the age of 7. This young lad had trouble with his right leg. He was either lame or had a problem with his back, causing him difficulty in walking. Then, in the secretary's office, I picked up a tall, thin man and later found out he was a past teacher who had died there. Later, it came to my attention that a member of the Winstanley family, probably the heir to the fortune, had taken on socialist principles during the 19th century and proposed to give the family fortune away to the poor. He mysteriously disappeared that same evening. I am sure this was the ghost that had been hanged. As I finished my inspection, I was in no doubt that certain family members will never leave this house. Many have chosen to return after they had died. The earliest report of the Winstanley ghost goes back to 1922. People have reported seeing these ghosts, including a former caretaker, a school secretary, and various psychic study groups. It was also confirmed for me by John Balon, a supply teacher and historian, that one member of the family had indeed kept a pet pig. An old mansion with ghosts is one thing, but a haunted massage parlour is another. I will not give away the location of the two premises I am going to refer to, and I will just say that they are both in the Midlands. I had visited both of them, but before anyone gets the wrong idea, I am not a masseur, just a clairvoyant who believes in giving something back to society. Never having been a conventional sort of person, I decided to volunteer to work on women's health issues. Of course, this means that I have to visit various establishments and give out material to help the working girls stay safe and healthy. It is good work and I love talking to the girls and hearing their stories. Some of their tales are funny and some downright awful. On a recent visit to one of the massage parlours, the owner, who believed the upper part of the house to be haunted, asked me if I would take a look in the upstairs bedroom. The first room had me mesmerised. I could not take my eyes off the ceiling. Not because there was a ghost here, but rather because of the artistic arrangement of stockings, suspender belt, and delicate underwear hanging from the ceiling. The owner shown me into a small room that was designed to look like a schoolroom. She went on to tell me that they had been dealing with a naughty boy in this room when they both felt a drop in the temperature and experienced the sensation of an invisible hand touching their hair. Many of the girls had said they felt uneasy here. One had phoned for a taxi to go home on a recent night after seeing a misty presence at the top of the stairs. Obviously, this spirit must have at some time occupied the bedroom now being used for adult discipline. And to use Queen Victoria's saying, we were not amused. I suggested she should move her schoolroom into one of the other bedrooms. Today, this seems to have solved the problem, but whether the ghost is still there, only time will tell. The other sauna add the ghost of a woman who walked up and down a passageway. Several of the girls had seen and felt her presence, and I saw her for myself on one of my visits. Although this establishment is beautifully refurbished and the atmosphere is very suppressive. There is a certain businessman who goes around these massage parlours and gives them ratings. In fact, a television documentary was made about him doing just that. Maybe these two massage parlours will get an upgrade for having something a little different at no extra charge. The organisation I do voluntary work for is called WHIP, Women's Health in Prostitution. It is a charity based in Leicester. The idea of this organisation is to help any women who want to leave their work and to give support and practical advice to those other working girls within the industry. With my knowledge of hypnotherapy, I was of help to them. So keeping the girls healthy and safe are the main priorities. Safety for myself should have been top of my agenda while I was ghost hunting in Market Harborough. There I'd learnt a valuable lesson. Never become complacent when doing any supernatural work. The day started with me being picked up from my home by a young man called Mike. He was making a film about Market Harborough ghost and had interviewed many different people for his project. He had previously asked me if I would be willing to check out a few secret venues with the Market Harborough district for him. To this I agreed. Our first trip was to the Three Swans Inn, where someone greeted us and told me about many sightings within the hotel. Sadly, it was not an ancient spirit that came through that day, but one of a young man who had died tragically many years ago by taking his own life. The man had been a member of staff. I have since learnt that my findings were correct and the Three Swans was included in a recently organised ghost walk. By late afternoon, I had started to grow a little weary, so I was delighted that my next visit to the Angel Inn was the last of the day. We arrived at this ancient coaching inn and were bombarded with tales of resident ghosts. Some of these sightings had apparently been dressed in 17th century costume. This was not the way I did ghost investigations, always preferring to have no knowledge of hauntings before doing my own inspection. It's not because I doubt anyone else's encounter, but because I do not want to be influenced at the commencement of my inquiry. One of the staff took us on a guided tour of the inn, showing us all the rooms and passageways where people claim to have seen ghostly apparitions. From whatever the reason, nothing was showing itself there to me that day. After a lengthy search at the hotel, I was convinced no ghostly presence was going to appear, and I decided it was time to leave. We were about to go when I was asked if I would just take a look in the cellar bar. I went down another passage, convinced the only spirits I would find in the inn were hanging behind the bar. Soon I would find out the hard way just how mistaken I was. My first impression on entering the cellar bar was how cold and damp it felt. This was not surprising as the room was only open occasionally. Confident nothing unearthly was present, I made my way over to the other end of the room. To my astonishment, out of the ether came a giant pair of hands which wrapped themselves round my throat and tried to strangle me. Next came pictures of three men, wearing what appeared to be smock-type garments, who stood close by. the movie played on, and I was forced to watch the rape and murder of a young peasant woman. After these callous men had killed her, they strung her up by the neck and left her hanging directly above where I'd been standing. Managing to remove myself from the spot took some doing, and my adrenaline was now flowing. Although none of us in the room saw any spirit presences, it was agreed that all of us felt a distinct change in the temperature. On the drive back to my home, Mike confessed this incident had made him very nervous. A week or two later he phoned me, letting me know that he had been given information about a woman who was supposed to have hung herself many centuries before in the hotel, but because the church considered suicide to be so bad in those days, there would have been no official records of their committing of this act. One thing was sure, the poor woman had not taken her own life, but had it taken for her by those evil men. Market Harborough had a weekly market which had been held on Tuesday since 1221. The cattle were congregated in the upper High Street near to two inns. There was always a great influx of people from the surrounding villages who went to buy or sell their goods. Many would then visit their local taverns. My feelings are the men in smocks would have been farmers or farm labourers. Market Harborough is noted for its many haunted buildings.